Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to segue into just continuing with ditches, but we're going to talk about designer ditches. I was asked to talk about designer ditches, and at the same time, I was asked by my boss to simplify them. And I'll talk about what that means. You can go to the next slide. So I am John from the Nanticoke Watershed Alliance. I'm the restoration coordinator. And our organization basically does most of the work in the Nanticoke watershed. So I want to you can see our mission there. So I wanted to point that out to you that you can see that this is our little bit of heaven right there. What we're going to present now is not necessarily just unique or exclusive to that watershed. So designer ditches can go beyond our watershed, just so you know. So I'm going to just get right into it. And traditionally, the functions of ditches had a few different things. Everything from trying to take care of mosquito populations to reducing flooding and property damage and preventing crop loss from too much rain, draining ag fields, and things like that. Designer ditches mostly do that, but can do more things as well. And so there's a bunch of things beyond that. Anything from improving aesthetics, which I know that's in the eyes of the beholder, but I would argue, that this is better than that or that. But, there are some who just like to see turf grass, and I understand that. It can improve habitat and increase food availability for wildlife, takes up nutrients, can mitigate some pollution. The designer ditches do a better job at reducing flood volume and erosion, and reducing erosion as well than just the regular old ditches. Of course, all this translates into helping our waterways and everything that lives in and around our waterways. They can replenish the groundwater, increase biodiversity, improves the water quality of our tributaries, etc. And the last thing I have on there, and this is like it can be less expensive and less labor intensive in the long term. We're going to talk more about that later. But in terms of the labor, you're mowing and or weed trimming on a regular basis, however many times throughout the growing season, as opposed to planting, really maintaining it really well for the first 2 years, but over time, it's somewhat self-sustaining. It still requires regular maintenance, but it can be less labor intensive. Just a real quick, I think everybody's familiar with the pervious, impervious thing. Don't get too caught up on the exact percentages, but essentially, if you have natural ground cover, more water is going to be filtered, whether it's shallow or deep, as opposed to if you have impervious cover. And that's what we're going for, is to get more water in the ground so that it can be filtered and off of the surface. Here you're seeing that there's a lot of runoff, and this is where you're encountering flash floods and things like that in your municipalities and towns, etc. You can go next one. The reason for a lot of this has to do with what's below the ground, below the surface, and going back to the whole lawn thing. Generally, your turf grass has very shallow roots. And I had a professor who told me that turf grass is like one step above concrete. That might be an exaggeration, but the point was well taken, that its minimal benefits are realized in the natural world, as opposed to natives that have a much more robust, extensive root system. And that translates into greater water and nutrient uptake, as well as soil stabilization. I mean, think about the erosion that can take place here versus if you have a network of roots that can hold the soil particles together. It even improves soil structure as well. You can go to the next one. You're gonna see this again. This is just a cross section of a designer ditch. What we're gonna focus on is the middle to the right here. That's our designer ditch focus. I'm saying that because this side, this is where the road is. This is your house or home over here. Most of the time, maintenance crews are going to be taking care of this area. And so I'm not saying you can't do something here, but there's a whole bunch of questions and things that you have to get answered before you can even think about doing that. You're not going to want to go planting things there only to have a maintenance crew come by and just mow it down on a regular basis. So we're going to focus on the 3 zones, 1, 2, and 3, as opposed to 4 and 5 for this. Zone 1 is the bottom of the ditch, 2 is the slope, and 3 is the top buffer area. All right, so we got a bunch of questions and a lot of different things that you have to take into consideration. Everything from ownership, who owns it? Is there an easement? Is it a tax ditch? Are there right-of-ways? Is there an HOA that you have to consult with and get approval from? And then dealing with water, how much stormwater is flowing through there? And what is that volume? Is it like a torrent? Is it like a rapids? Or is it like a slow moving water? Or is it just sitting there? If it's standing water, how long is it standing there? What happens to cause it to be there that long? Do you have erosion problems? Are you seeing gullies forming down the bank leading to the ditch? That could be a problem. That's just going to create more sediment into that ditch. Is there anything blocking the flow of the water, whether downstream, maybe a neighbor's property or on yours? Of course, you always have to deal with logistics in terms of utilities before you start digging. You're not going to be, if you're doing a designer ditch, you're not going to be digging too deeply. But I'm always saying be safe rather than sorry. Don't go digging. There can be some shallow lines. I've encountered things just inches below the surface where a phone company put something in or a cable. And so don't try to cheat that. Was there a dip out recently? How long ago was that done? And as Wes said, you know, are you going to be due for a new one? So you may not want to do that if, you know, it's 15, 20 years since, because it's coming. Okay, next one. Oh, the goal of this designer ditch. Why are you even here to think about a designer ditch? Is it because you have an erosion problem? Is it because you want to try to improve the aesthetics? Your answers about the goal can help with some of the other questions that you've had, some of which might be like with the design. In terms of the design of your ditch, size, shape, the depth of it, you know, are you willing to have a buffer area at the top? Do the plants need to be below a certain height to allow you to be able to see traffic as you're pulling out of the drive? So all those are types of things that you have to think about. The cultural, in terms of the plant culture, with any garden, you know, a lot of these questions have to do with any time you're talking about doing something in the ground, you have to ask a lot of these questions. So sunlight, how about road salt? That can be a problem. And one quick thing about road salt, I've had people ask me, are there salt tolerant plants? And yes, there are salt tolerant plants, but there's a difference between a pile of salt that's been dumped on a road and then it's shoveled or plowed over and then it's sitting there. And there's a difference between that and salt tolerant, because that's like just an incredible amount of salt at one time. And then that goes away and then it's like no salt. So just to be aware that don't assume that just because it says salt tolerant that it's going to be able to withstand. If you get a lot of salt spread on your road nearby, you may not want to consider this because there can be problems with that. I can give you some suggestions as to what plants might be able to withstand that though. And then the type of soil that you have. Yeah, most of our soil is on the sandy side around here, but there are pockets of some clay here and there. And, you know, virtually none of it's like virgin soil. It's been manipulated at some point by construction over the decades. So so there can be some subsoil that's been brought to the surface, et cetera. And then maintenance, that's the biggie right there. And that's why it's in italics. Will you regularly maintain the ditch, especially for the first 2 years? Because if you can't make that commitment, again, I would say you probably don't want to invest the time and money and energy into starting this process. Because you'll do that and then you'll be frustrated if you aren't keeping up with it. And then you'll say it's not successful, it hasn't been effective. And then it looks bad for any other neighbors who may want to consider it. They see that yours failed. Well, they didn't really know that you didn't maintain it. So that's why I'm suggesting, you know, it's a commitment, especially for the first 2 years. Okay, next. By now, you're probably saying, all right, well, how in the world is this simplified? Well, I haven't gotten to that part yet. Again, all those questions, all those considerations are things that are beyond my control. I don't have anything to do with that. You have to ask those questions and you have to consider those things. You can go to the next one. The way I attacked this was our original plant list through our organization. It's fairly extensive. It's still a good list, and I would refer to it in some cases. But it's kind of long, and a lot of decisions have to be made on what's there. So what I did, you can go to the next one, is that the way I decided to simplify it is by narrowing down the number of species that you would be seeking if you're going to consider designer ditches. And I did that based on what I think are most readily available. I've got a background with working with native plant nursery in the past. I kind of know what is normally available. We all know that the best designs, whether they're amateur landscape designs or professional landscape designs, are only as good as the available plants. You know, you can get great looking designs and find all these plants that they're nowhere to be found. So I'm familiar with what is usually available, and I'm not saying just here in Delaware. You might have to go beyond the confines of this state, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, et cetera, to get some local or some native species. But I did some checking. That's all right. The other thing was maintenance, and it has to do with in the spring when everything is coming up, including the plants that you don't want. It's tough to remember what the plants that you do want look like. And so what I did was I broke them down into 3 different categories: herbaceous, fern, and grass. And that's what I'm making available in terms of my revised plant list, because they are fairly easily distinguishable. And by minimizing the number of species and by picking these wisely, you should be able to tell the difference between them and get to know them really well, get to know the difference between them and perhaps anything else that might be growing that's trying to encroach in your area. Okay, good. Okay, so this is just zone 1. And I have copies of this stuff as well as some other brochures if anybody's interested after the call. And so what you would do is you would just pick 2 species from here. I have 3 plant types, but it's 2 species, one from a different plant type, not from each necessarily. So you would either pick a grass-like plant, a fern, or an herbaceous, but just go with 2 of them. All right. And this information, the species that I picked, again, are the ones that I find to be fairly available for the most part. I tried to do the best I could as far as getting plants or making some offerings that will take all different types of light conditions. As you know, full shade is a tough one. So you'll have to kind of work with me here. Some can tolerate more part shade, full shade. And then I did just a quick thing here in terms of the type of moisture that they would prefer that can guide you as to maybe one over the other, as well as the type of soil that you might have. And just if you're not familiar, full sun, I typically define as something more than 6 hours of direct sunlight. Full shade would be less than 2 hours of direct sun. Okay. Again, this is that thing that was zone 1 that you were looking at. So now we're going to go to zone 2 and 3. And you can see zone 2 and 3. What you would do is pick 2 species from each of these zones, 1 grass and 1 herbaceous of that. And then also, and this is just for zone 3, you would pick a shrub. And that's that top buffer part. You can go to the next one. So you would end up with something that looks like this. I'm kind of a shape color person, and so rather than having a bunch of letters and stuff, I just like to be able to match up the shape and color. Again, you'll notice zone 4 and 5 here. That's, we're going to say del dot maintain. So that's hands off that. That's the turf grass. You're planting in the bottom, the slope, and the top. The bottom plant or plants, they're pretty much going to be just for the bottom, as opposed to zones 2 and 3. You'll see that, you know, sometimes they're interchangeable. It depends on the slope steepness, the type of soil, etc., as to what you're going to do. Don't get stuck on saying, oh, I can't plant my zone 2 plant in zone 3. You know, you probably can. And in fact, you'll find over time, some plants migrate. They don't stay where you want them. So that's what that would look like. You can see a total of 7 species is what you would be planting. Not a total of 7 plants, but a species. And this is not to scale or anything. You would want to plant densely if you want to try to get them well established to hold that soil, etc. Okay. So for the preparation of the site, basically it's an herbicide. It's got to be the aquatic safe herbicide that you would do 2 to 3 weeks in advance. You may have to make an additional application. By all means, follow the label directions. Just a quick caution about when you do apply herbicides. You know, it says, I don't know that they define wind or a windy day, but you know, it could be a 5-6 mile an hour wind. I mean, it could be a light wind and you can still get drift from that. So be real careful when you're doing it. I really pick as still a day as possible. And then the beauty of this is that you just kill the turf grass and let it stay there, because that's actually going to help maintain the soil particles so that nothing erodes in the meantime. Installing, basically what you do, you're going to be planting right through the turf grass, the dead turf grass. And I would suggest, in terms of how to install it, you would lay out plants in zones 2 and 3 and plant them. And then lay out the plants in zone 1 and plant that. And the reason you do that is because you can kind of stand at the bottom and kind of work at the upper parts of the ditch. It makes it a lot easier on the back and just less likely that you're going to trample over anything in the bottom. Of course, you got to water anything that you are planting thoroughly. And the top buffer zone is the only one where you're going to put mulch. Don't bother with the sides or the bottom for obvious reasons. The mulch is going to go away. Make sure that that top part is not slightly going this way, or that you don't have any erosion issues where maybe some water was going in this direction, because that could actually push some of the mulch down the slope into the ditch. Okay. Maintenance, a huge thing. You're gonna need to water that ditch regularly for the first 2 years, especially during the hot and dry, weather conditions. It's, it's gardening essentially. So weeds are everywhere and all the time, right? So you need to get out there and weed. Certainly don't let them go to seed. I always feel like, okay, if I don't have time to weed right now, if I see the weeds starting to flower, at the very least, I'm gonna go pluck those flowers off just to buy some time. You do want to get back there though, because sometimes that can generate more growth at the root system. So you do need to get in there to eventually weed them out. Of course, you're gonna need to remove trash and debris from the ditch, and that's especially important this time of the year in autumn. And you just want to make sure that's being done so that you're not going to get clogs of any culverts or pipes, etc. Certainly, if you have any seed heads of the native species, go ahead and take advantage of it. Take them and spread them either right there or someplace else in your yard. And again, keep that mulch on the top buffer zone. In terms of monitoring and assessing, you're just going to check to make sure that if you have any dead plants, you can identify them. Maybe you can identify why they died, and are there any that are spreading, any species that seem to be struggling, any eroding areas. Okay. So the takeaway here would be to make sure know that you're just planting the bottom, the one side slope, and the top buffer, and that's all closest to the house, and that's in most cases zones 1, 2, and 3. Ditches, there's so much variability in ditches, and so it's tough to really have a template for everybody here. So you need to go into it and you need to get intimately familiar with your ditches as far as knowing just about everything you can if you're going to plant stuff there. So everything from the soil type, which will tell you what kind of water holding capacity that has, especially when it's sloped, etc. Sizes, water conveyance, etc. The maintenance can be labor intensive for those first 2 years. Don't underestimate what you need to do in the beginning. It's not optional as far as the weeding and the fall cleanup. And then again, top buffer mulching only. Okay. And then just to finish off, as I had previously mentioned, plants can migrate. So you may have planted something in zone 2, but it may be years from there, you find more of it on zone 3. The plant's telling you, this is where you should have put me. All right. You don't know that. So embrace that. It may have screwed up your design. It may not be what you were looking for, but the function is still there, and the benefits that you could realize would still be there. Just a personal little tidbit that I would have is, like, if you're choosing any of the grass or grass-like plant types, and you think you're going to have a difficult time making the distinction between them and any neighboring turf grass that you have, go ahead and mark it or flag it, just a couple of them, so that in the spring, when they're starting to emerge and you're starting to see those leaves, you really study those leaves and compare it to all the others, and you'll know which ones were the ones that you planted, which ones are not the ones you planted. That's your weed. And so that's how you would maybe take that out. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I still do that, just so you know. So and then the last thing would be, this is just a starting point. All right, so I can provide you certain resources and things like that, but certainly I encourage you to look beyond the charts and the things that I provided you and the things that I can hand out to you if you're interested in any of them. The more you get to know about the characteristics and the requirements, the growing needs of your plants, the more likely you're going to have success with something like this. And I think that's it. We do have our brochures available online. If you are in the Nanticoke River watershed, we do provide free site visits. And if you're not sure if you are, certainly contact me. I have business cards too, and we can certainly help you out with that. And I think that's it. And you want to do questions later?
See if there's anyone with like a burning question, feel free to, I say, ask it now, but so somebody just asked in the chat though, what is the difference between a ditch and a swale?
Well, I think swales are.
And Jessica might be the good one to ask about that, but she has to step out.
You said Jessica?
I think, yeah, she
They
said.
tend to be the same thing, it's just different organizations use different terms for them. Some places call them swells, some places call them ditches.
And they can be dry or wet.
Mhm.
I know I've always felt like swales are often or seems broader sometimes, like
Not
a
as
little
deep.
wider, not as deep.
Less
Yeah.
channelized.
Yeah.
The regions, like out west, they're swells, in the southeast, they're ditches.
Okay.
Here we can't decide, we do both.
Hopefully that answers the question.
So what do you used to use the term I do this, we do this. And is that, you're the coordinator of this company or?
No, I'm the restoration coordinator. And we have an executive director and a deputy.
Who's we?
The Nanticoke
So,
Watershed.
the Nanticoke, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, and how big are they? What is
We are small. We are real small.
How-
Although we doubled just upon my hire and our outreach coordinator. So we currently have four
people?
people, full-time folks.
And how many ditches, tax ditches do you maintain?
They don't,
Well, they don't.
You don't,
they're not.
you just design it, you come up with plans for,
No, they're nonprofit providing information.
I
to-
think there's cost share, but there's not.
you don't
And,
get paid for what you do at all.
well, I mean, we are strictly grant funded, our entire organization. So we do get the luxury of having money that we can use to hire like summer interns and things like that. And we do work with some residential folks. And if we have the available money, we can work with homeowners and help with the labor, in fact. And it's beyond ditches too. We do pollinator gardens and things like that as well. So anything that is beneficial to the watershed, nature-based things like that, we entertain that way. And I do more of the coordinating, and I do a lot of the municipalities like Seaford and Laurel. I work in Cambridge too, but that's the chop tank boat. I know that's a different watershed, but
Different civic associations or city groups.
Right.
Not necessarily maintenance firms that do pond and ditch maintenance, not, work with them.
no, I'm not, no, we're not like, I mean, we know of them and we can
Yeah.
refer you to them. They have more of the technical expertise and the labor and the money to be able to help you on that end.